An army marches forward expecting resistance, battle, and victory. Instead, it finds silence. Burned fields, empty villages, poisoned wells, destroyed roads. There is no army to fight, and nothing left to take. This is scorched earth, one of the most brutal strategies ever used in warfare. A simple but devastating idea. If you cannot defeat the invading army directly, you destroy everything it needs to survive. No food, no shelter, no supplies. In 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Russia with one of the most powerful armies Europe had ever seen. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers advanced, expecting a decisive battle that would break Russian resistance. But the Russians refused to fight on Napoleon's terms. They retreated and burned their own land behind them. Crops were set on fire, supply depots destroyed, villages evacuated and abandoned. Even Moscow was left empty and consumed by flames. Napoleon kept advancing, technically winning territory, but every step deeper into Russia weakened his army. There was nothing to eat, nowhere to rest. Winter closed in. Horses collapsed first. Then soldiers began to fall from hunger, exhaustion, and disease. The army wasn't being defeated by an enemy force. It was being destroyed by emptiness. When the retreat finally began, it turned into disaster. Freezing temperatures and starvation wiped out what remained. More soldiers died from the environment than from combat. The same strategy returned in World War II. As German forces pushed into Soviet territory, railways were destroyed, crops burned, and fuel supplies eliminated. Tanks stalled, supply lines stretched and broke. Momentum died, but scorched earth carried a heavy price. Civilians lost homes, food, and livelihoods. Entire regions were sacrificed by their own defenders just to stop the invasion. It revealed a harsh truth about war. Victory doesn't always come from defeating the enemy in battle. Sometimes victory comes from making survival impossible. When the land itself turns against an army, even the strongest force in the world begins to collapse. No charging armies, no heroic clashes, just waiting and slowly dying. Siege warfare is one of the oldest and most brutal strategies ever used. Instead of storming a city and risking massive losses, an army surrounds it, cutting off food, water, and reinforcements until the defenders collapse from hunger and exhaustion. Time becomes the weapon. In ancient and medieval wars, strong city walls made direct assaults costly and dangerous. So attackers chose patience. They blocked supply routes, destroyed farmland outside the walls, and waited. Inside the city, life turned into a nightmare. Food ran out first, then clean water, prices rose, hunger spread, families rationed every bite. Disease followed quickly in crowded, weakened populations. During the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE, famine became so severe that survival itself turned desperate and horrifying. Centuries later, in World War II, the siege of Leningrad lasted nearly 900 days. Civilians endured freezing winters with almost no food. People ate anything they could find just to stay alive. Hundreds of thousands died, not from battle, but from starvation. Sieges attacked the human mind as much as the body. Hope slowly disappeared. Morale collapsed. The fear inside the walls often became stronger than the enemy outside them, and surrender did not always bring safety. Cities that held out too long could still face destruction or punishment. For commanders, siege warfare avoided direct combat and saved soldiers' lives. For those trapped inside, it was a slow, relentless fight for survival. The battlefield wasn't outside the walls. It was inside homes, streets, and empty kitchens. Siege warfare proved a chilling truth. War is not always decided by strength or bravery. Sometimes it is decided by who can endure hunger the longest and who breaks first. Some armies didn't just fight their enemies, they terrified them into submission. Terror warfare is built on a simple, ruthless idea. You don't need to defeat every army if you can destroy the will to resist. Fear becomes the weapon. Violence becomes the message. Few forces used this strategy more effectively than the Mongols under Genghis Khan. When a city resisted, it wasn't just conquered, it was annihilated. Entire populations were killed, and a few survivors were deliberately spared, not out of mercy, but to spread the story. Those survivors carried the warning to the next city. Surrender, or you will face the same fate. And it worked. Fear traveled faster than any army. Many cities surrendered without a fight, opening their gates before Mongol forces even arrived. Resistance collapsed before battle began. Other empires used similar tactics throughout history. Public executions, mass punishments, and the destruction of entire towns meant to send a message far beyond the battlefield. Terror saved time. It reduced resistance. It turned a single brutal act into a psychological shockwave that weakened entire regions. but the cost was devastating. Civilians became the primary victims. Communities were destroyed not just for military reasons, but to create fear. War stopped being a clash of armies and became an assault on the human spirit itself. Because once fear takes hold, people stop fighting. They stop resisting. They surrender before the first sword is drawn. Terror warfare revealed a chilling truth. Victory isn't always won through strength. Sometimes it's won by convincing the enemy that resistance is hopeless. When fear becomes stronger than courage, battle is already over before it begins. There was a time when wars were fought between armies on battlefields. Then came total war, when entire nations became part of the fight. In total war, the goal is not just to defeat enemy soldiers, but to destroy the system that keeps those soldiers alive and fighting. Factories, railways, farms, power supplies, everything becomes a target, because modern war runs on industry. During the American Civil War, General William Tecumseh Sherman marched through the South, not just attacking military forces, but destroying railroads, crops, and infrastructure. His strategy was simple: break the South's ability and will to continue the war. Decades later, World War II pushed this idea to its extreme. Bombers flew over cities, targeting industrial zones, transportation networks, and production centers. But factories were surrounded by homes. Workers lived beside the machines that powered the war effort. And when bombs fell, civilians suffered alongside industry. Entire cities were reduced to rubble. Power grids collapsed. Supply systems failed. War was no longer confined to the front lines. It entered daily life. Every worker, every train, every factory became part of the battlefield. The line between soldier and civilian began to disappear. Victory depended on which nation could produce more weapons, repair damage faster, and endure destruction longer than the enemy. Total war turned conflict into a test of national survival. Not just armies clashing, but societies grinding against each other. It revealed a terrifying shift in human history. War was no longer about capturing land or defeating an army. It was about breaking an entire nation's ability to function. And once society itself becomes the battlefield, nowhere is truly safe anymore. Some wars are fought for territory, some for power, and some to erase entire populations from existence. Genocidal warfare is not about defeating an army on the battlefield. It targets civilians as the primary objective. The goal is chillingly simple: remove the people, and resistance disappears. Throughout history, invading forces have used mass killings, forced deportations, and starvation to eliminate groups they saw as threats. Entire communities were uprooted, cultures destroyed, identities erased. The most systematic example came during World War II with the Holocaust. Killing became organized, industrial, and calculated. Trains transported victims. Camps processed them. Bureaucracy turned mass murder into a system. It wasn't chaos, it was policy. In other conflicts, ethnic cleansing forced populations from their homes to permanently reshape territories. Families fled. Cities changed. Regions were emptied and repopulated. This strategy wasn't about short-term victory. It was about long-term control, reshaping the demographic reality so opposition could never rise again. But genocidal warfare leaves wounds deeper than any battlefield. Survivors carry trauma across generations. Societies fracture. Hatred lingers. Borders and politics are shaped by memories of loss and violence. It doesn't end when the war ends. Because when a people are targeted for who they are, not for what they've done, war becomes something far darker than conquest. It becomes erasure, and history has shown that once violence reaches that level, there are no true winners left. When an enemy is stronger, better equipped, and larger, fighting them head-on is suicide. So instead, you change the rules. Guerrilla warfare is built on mobility, surprise, and patience. Small groups strike quickly, ambushing patrols, sabotaging supply lines, attacking isolated units, and then disappear before a counterattack can begin. There is no front line, no clear battlefield, no decisive clash, only constant pressure. This strategy appeared throughout history. Spanish fighters used it against Napoleon's army. Anti-colonial movements used it against global empires. In the 20th century, it defined conflicts in Vietnam and Afghanistan. The goal isn't to destroy the enemy in one battle. It's to exhaust them over time. Every road becomes dangerous. Every village could hide resistance. Every patrol becomes a risk. The stronger army must guard everything, everywhere, all the time. And slowly, Fatigue sets in, not just physically but mentally and politically. Support back home begins to fade. The war feels endless. Victory feels distant. But guerrilla warfare carries its own brutality. Fighters blend into civilian populations, and retaliation often falls on the communities suspected of helping them. Villages are searched, homes destroyed, innocent people caught between two sides. War becomes personal, close, constant. It's not a war of massive battles, it's a war of survival and endurance. And in the end, the stronger army may still have more weapons, more soldiers, and more resources. But if it loses the will to continue, it loses the war. Because guerrilla warfare doesn't aim to win quickly, it aims to make the enemy too tired, too frustrated, and too broken to keep fighting at all. For much of history, war wasn't only about land, gold, or power. It was about people. Armies didn't just defeat enemies, they captured them. Civilians were taken from their homes and turned into slaves, laborers, soldiers serving the very forces that conquered them. War became a system of human extraction. Ancient empires depended on it. After victories, entire populations were marched away from their homeland to work farms, build cities, or serve in armies. Viking raids targeted coastal settlements not only for treasure, but for captives. Later, massive slave networks stretched across continents, fueled by warfare and raids. Every conquest meant more bodies to control. This strategy weakened the enemy while strengthening the conqueror. Removing a population destroyed local resistance, drained the workforce, and shattered communities. At the same time, those captives were used to expand economies, construct infrastructure, and reinforce military power. But the brutality was immense. Families were torn apart in moments. Children separated from parents. Languages, traditions, and identities slowly erased under forced control. Entire cultures were uprooted and scattered. War was no longer just about destruction. It was about ownership. People became resources, living tools of empire, and the impact didn't end with the war itself. Generations were born into servitude. Societies were reshaped by forced migration and exploitation. Demographics changed permanently. Slave raiding revealed one of the harshest realities of warfare. Sometimes victory wasn't measured in land captured or enemies defeated, but in how many human lives could be taken, controlled, and used. When war turns people into prizes, humanity itself becomes the battlefield. For most of history, destruction took time. Armies marched, battles lasted hours, sometimes days. Victory came step by step. Then technology changed everything. The Industrial Age introduced weapons capable of killing on a scale humanity had never seen before. Machine guns could cut down entire charges in seconds. The artillery could flatten positions miles away. Chemical gas turned the air itself into a weapon. World War I showed the terrifying power of mechanized warfare. Soldiers in trenches faced death they couldn't see. Shells falling from the sky, gas drifting through the air, bullets sweeping across open ground. But World War II pushed destruction even further. Strategic bombing turned cities into targets, industrial centers, transport systems, and entire urban populations came under attack from the sky. War was no longer limited to the front lines. Then came the most devastating leap of all: nuclear weapons. In 1945, a single atomic bomb destroyed an entire city in moments. Tens of thousands died instantly. Many more suffered from burns, radiation, and long-term illness. The scale of destruction was beyond anything the world had ever experienced. War had entered a new era. The first time, a single weapon could wipe out a city or threaten the survival of entire nations. This created a new kind of strategy: deterrence. Countries built powerful arsenals not just to fight wars, but to prevent them. Fear of total annihilation kept major powers from attacking each other directly. But that fear came with a haunting reality. Humanity now possessed the ability to destroy itself. Weapons of mass destruction didn't just change how wars were fought, they changed what war meant. It was no longer just brutal, it was no longer just destructive. Now, for the first time in history, war had the power to be final.